While we prepare to hear this matter, I kindly ask you to support the channel by subscribing, giving a like, and mentioning in the comments where you're tuning in from.
I remember thousands of people walking into my courtroom, but I rarely remember the ones who enter as if the court works for them. That morning, one woman did exactly that. It was an ordinary weekday docket, parking citations, a few speeding tickets, the kind of cases that keep a city moving. The room held a quiet, familiar mix. An older couple whispering over paperwork, a young driver staring at his hands, a mother sitting close to her son like she could shield him from the whole building. You could hear the soft shuffle of folders, the faint coughs people try to hide, the low hum of patients. Then she came in, mid-40s, maybe 50. Expensive coat, hair set like it had an appointment of its own. She moved fast, not rushed, more like she expected the room to part for her. She didn't look at anyone as she passed. She chose a seat like she was choosing a table she'd reserved, and when she sat down it was sharp, final. A designer bag went on the bench beside her, placed with the quiet confidence of someone marking territory. Her arms folded across her chest, but her jaw was tighter than her posture wanted to admit. Her eyes swept the room with a quick, irritated scan, like the faces around her were part of the delay. Before I even called her case, she let out a loud sigh. Not a shout, not a scene, just enough volume to make sure the whole room caught it. Unbelievable that this takes so long. The air changed. People who had been lost in their own worries lifted their heads. A man in the second row stopped, tapping his foot. The older couple went still. It wasn't fear, more like everyone recognized the sound of entitlement, the way you recognize a siren in the distance. In my mind, I heard the thought that's visited me many times over the years. When a person isn't afraid of court, it isn't always courage. More often, it's a long habit of privilege. And yet there was something else, something quieter. Between her displays of control, her fingers kept gripping the strap of that bag, squeezing and releasing, like she was testing her own strength. She sat up straighter every few seconds, as if preparing for impact. It wasn't calm. It was a defensive stance dressed up as confidence. I watched her closely, the way you learn to do after decades on the bench. People tell you their story with words, but they tell you the truth with timing, with breath, with what they can't stop doing. She hadn't said anything serious yet, but she'd already told the room everything about how she saw the world. Then I glanced at the next file on my list, and the moment I read what it was, I understood why she was so angry. I picked up the file and felt that familiar weight in something so small. A parking ticket doesn't look like much on paper, just ink, a date, a location, but I've learned that small cases often reveal the biggest habits. Improper parking, a loading zone behind a little grocery store. Not a fancy chain, one of those neighborhood places where the owner knows your name and the delivery guy knows which step squeaks. The citation was written plain, no drama, vehicle stopped in a marked loading area, access blocked, officer instructed driver to move, driver refused. People hear loading zone and think it's a convenience. It isn't. It's how working people keep the doors open. When a delivery can't get in, someone loses hours, someone loses money, and the day starts late for everybody who can least afford late. I looked deeper, like I always do when something feels rehearsed. Same car, same type of violation more than once, similar appeals. The language in her prior explanations had a pattern, everything minimized, everything framed as everyone else overreacting. That's when the case stopped being about one morning behind one store. When I called her name, she stood quickly, shoulders back, chin lifted. But her eyes were sharper now, less bored, more calculating. She stepped to the front with a practiced certainty, the kind you see in people who are used to getting a door open before they touch the handle. I asked her how she pleaded. Not responsible, she said, clean and confident. I began reading the facts aloud, not to punish her with words, just to make sure the room understood we were dealing with reality, not opinion. As I spoke, she stopped fidgeting. She didn't interrupt. She watched me the way some people watch a referee waiting to see if the rules will actually be enforced. Then she offered a line that landed like it had been used before, polished by experience. This has never gone this far before. She didn't threaten me. She didn't have to. The message was in the calmness. Usually someone folds. Usually the process bends. Usually she doesn't end up in front of a judge. I kept my voice steady, the way my father taught me to keep my hands steady when I worked beside him. Dignity isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. I asked simple questions: where she parked, how long she stayed, whether a truck was waiting. Her answers came fast, smooth, almost too smooth. And as she spoke, I saw it. The slight delay before certain words, the quick glance down when she said just a moment, the tightening at the corners of her mouth when I mentioned the delivery. Her story sounded reasonable, the paperwork didn't. And that's the moment I knew the next few minutes would come down to one thing: whether her words could survive the facts. I let her finish before I spoke again. That matters. People reveal more in the space they think is safe. She told me she had been gone only a few minutes, said she hadn't blocked anyone, said there was plenty of room for a truck to get through. The words came out quick, practiced, like they'd been arranged in advance. As she spoke, she leaned forward just slightly close enough to feel assertive, not close enough to look aggressive. I turned the file so I could see it clearly, even though I already had. The timestamp said 18 minutes. The photograph showed a delivery truck angled awkwardly, its nose stopped short, nowhere to go. You could almost feel the idling engine from the picture alone. I didn't comment right away. I just let the silence sit there, heavy enough to invite honesty. A few people in the room shifted. Someone in the back shook his head without realizing it. Nobody said a word. I asked her again, calmly, about the length of time. This time, her answer changed, not completely, just enough. It felt shorter, she said. Her voice was firmer now, edged. Her shoulders tightened. Her fingers curled into her palm, nails pressing skin. I've seen that before. When the facts close in, the body knows first. I turned to the officer. I didn't need drama. I just needed clarity. He spoke the way good officers do, measured, respectful, factual. He explained that the truck had been waiting, that the driver had tried to signal, that she'd been asked to move and declined. He didn't raise his voice when he mentioned her tone, but he didn't soften it either. He said she spoke to him like he was an inconvenience, like he worked for her. No judgment, just memory. That's when she snapped. She cut him off mid-sentence, her voice louder than the room was used to hearing. Do your job. The words echoed off the wood and settled hard. Conversations stopped in other corners of the courtroom. Even the people who weren't paying attention before were now. I didn't react right away. I didn't scold her. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at her. In all my years on the bench, I've learned that anger isn't strength. It's usually fear arriving late. And right then, I saw it in her eyes. Not embarrassment, not remorse, fear of losing control of a situation she believed she owned. I felt a familiar thought pass through me, the kind my father used to teach without ever saying it out loud. Respect isn't demanded, it's demonstrated. I paused longer than usual, long enough for her breathing to change, long enough for the room to understand something had shifted. This was no longer about where a car was parked. And in that silence, she realized she'd crossed a line she couldn't step back over. The words hung in the air after she shouted them. Not outrage, not gasps, just a thick, waiting silence, the kind a courtroom knows well. People weren't reacting, they were watching. They understood something had shifted, even if they couldn't name it yet. Her breathing was sharp now, uneven. Her shoulders stayed squared, tense like wire pulled too tight. She kept her eyes locked on me, daring me to respond the way she expected, louder, harsher, emotional. I could see it plainly. This wasn't emotion. This was a person who had learned over time that volume creates results. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't interrupt her again. Instead, I set my pen down slowly, deliberately, and leaned back just enough to let the moment breathe. The pause stretched longer than comfort allows, long enough for the attention in the room to shift away from the bench and onto her. Silence has a way of doing that. When I finally spoke, my tone was steady, lower than before. Not cold, not kind, clear. No one raises their voice in this courtroom, I said, and no one gives orders here. I didn't say it to punish her. I said it because rules, when they matter, should be spoken plainly. For the first time since she'd walked in, something flickered across her face. Her eyebrows twitched. Her jaw loosened. She looked away just briefly, but that was enough. Control had slipped. I asked her a simple question. Not sharp, not loaded, just factual. One that brought us back to the moment behind the store, back to the car, and the block space, and the waiting truck. She started to answer and stopped. The words didn't come out right. She tried again. Her voice faltered. A few seconds passed where she said nothing at all. I watched her hands. They were still now. In all my years on the bench, I've seen this moment more times than I can count. When noise fails, when authority doesn't bend, when a person realizes they're being asked to listen instead of dominate. And in that quiet, something finally went off the rails. Not the court, not the process. Her certainty. I returned to the file, not because I needed it, but because structure matters when emotions start to wobble. Facts don't calm a room by accident. They do it because they're solid. I read them slowly. The exact time the vehicle was first observed. The duration it remained in the loading zone. The photograph taken from the curb, clear, unembellished. A delivery truck angled just enough to show it had nowhere to go. I read the officer's notes without emphasis, without commentary. I didn't look at her while I did it. I let the facts stand on their own feet. The courtroom was quiet in a different way now. Not tense, focused. People weren't waiting for conflict anymore. They were listening. Then I added one detail that never appears dramatic on paper, but always lands heavy in real life. Because her car blocked that space, the delivery couldn't be made on time. The driver waited. The store owner waited. The front gate stayed locked longer than it should have. Morning customers stood outside longer than planned. A small business started its day behind schedule. None of that is catastrophic. No headlines, no outrage. But that's how most harm actually happens, quietly, stacked in minutes that don't belong to the person who takes them. I watched her as I spoke. Her lips pressed together, not in defiance now, but restraint. Her eyes dropped not to the floor, but inward, like she was replaying something she hadn't planned to revisit. The challenge was gone. In its place was uncertainty. Then her voice came back, softer than before, almost careful. I was under a lot of stress that day. She didn't say it to escape responsibility. I could hear that. It wasn't an excuse, it was a crack. The first time she'd spoken like a person instead of a position. I nodded once. Stress explains behavior, I thought. It never excuses it. I delivered my decision plainly. The citation would stand, the fine would be paid in full. No reduction, no accommodation. And I was clear about why not as a lecture, but as a boundary. Repeated violations don't signal misunderstanding, they signal choice. I warned her what another incident would mean, not harshly, honestly. As I finished, someone in the gallery spoke, not loud enough to disrupt, just loud enough to be heard. Thank you, Judge. No applause, no reaction beyond that. Just a quiet acknowledgement from someone who understood what fairness looks like when it's done right. She stood there for a moment after I was finished, not arguing, not nodding, just absorbing the weight of a decision that didn't bend to volume or status. And that, I've learned, is often where the real impact begins. When I finished speaking, she didn't answer right away. No reflex, No protests, no last attempt to regain ground. She just stood there, still for a moment, as if she were adjusting to a room that no longer bent around her. "I understand," she said. It wasn't said softly to gain sympathy, and it wasn't sharp enough to sound resentful. It was flat, honest, and final. Not agreement, but acceptance. The kind that comes when a person realizes the argument is over not because they lost, but because there's nothing left to argue against. She picked up her bag. This time she didn't grip it like armor. Her movements were slower than when she came in, more measured. She didn't scan the room. She didn't look for reactions. She walked out the way people do when they're carrying a thought they didn't bring with them. After the door closed, the courtroom breathed again. You could feel it, papers rustling, chairs shifting, someone clearing their throat. The tension didn't explode or dissolve dramatically. It simply released the way it does when fairness lands quietly and stays put. I called the next case. Another name, another set of facts. The docket moved forward like it always does. Justice isn't a single moment. It's a rhythm, and you don't stop the music for one note, no matter how sharp it sounded. But some notes stay with you. Months passed. Seasons changed. One afternoon, while reviewing routine compliance reports, I noticed something familiar, not because it stood out, but because it didn't. Her fine had been paid. On time, no extensions, no arguments. After that, her record went quiet. No repeat violations, no patterns, no returns to my courtroom. That's the kind of outcome most people never notice. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't come with letters or apologies or dramatic turnarounds. But in my experience, it's the most honest kind of change, the kind that happens when no one is watching. Sometime later, I was walking through a courthouse corridor between sessions. Judges learn those hallways the way sailors learn tides. I saw her coming from the opposite direction. She recognized me before I recognized her. There was no tension in her face this time, no challenge, no performance. She nodded just once. I nodded back. We didn't stop. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. That exchange held more meaning than any words she could have offered in my courtroom months earlier. It told me she remembered not the fine, not the embarrassment, but the moment when the noise stopped working. As I continued down the hall, my thoughts drifted, as they often do, to my father. He never wore a robe. He never sat behind a bench. But he understood people. He believed authority should be steady, not loud. That dignity should never be surrendered, even when someone else throws theirs away. He used to tell me that justice isn't about silencing people. It's about leaving them alone with their conscience long enough for it to speak. That case reminded me of that. Some people enter court believing the world rearranges itself when they raise their voice, that rules are flexible if you push hard enough, that respect is something you take. Every now and then, life offers them a quieter lesson, one where no one yells back, one where the facts don't flinch, one where accountability stands still and waits. And when that happens, change doesn't announce itself. It simply shows up later in smaller choices made without an audience. Because shouting can force people to step aside, but only respect teaches them where they truly stand.